Hi, Nyajong, everybody, for joining us today on our live. One thing now, I just want to share a little bit, right? At the Bela online, la tatara China ya. So yeah, hi. Sorry, some technical issues. Um, so yeah, bé落 online live 那那樣咯，睇咗係啲bé寶寶 ice 落到bé咗 community，睇bé咗啲咗bé啥 clear 到實到個呢實到包係啲你冇ใจ啦，只落啲睇呢度傾那樣so 有啲呢落 join bé mà nó là chỉ này họ bắt share bé đây video個呢有朋友咯，là 是呢chỉ nên họ bảo thì係啲冇ใจ啦，只落啲睇了thế nào chị vấn đề nó chị nên bỏ bé cái chống nhỏ nữa nó này sau cuối cho xử lý thôi là khi cho là lúc bé thì là sợ chạy nó lúc còn học thêm này so mà biết vấn đề nó của hoa vì nè của họ luôn nhớ cho họ lúc rồi của họ Hmong American Women's Association nhớ cho họ Milwaukee bên lúc cùng họ mua cái ba cho bạn nhẹ thiết tuân sai lúa thiết cho nên là LGBTQ cho cái chỉ cho chỉ ta lên đầu là bé họ mua cho cái bác kia xong rồi mua bom bà này giờ sẽ mua bom bà lấy trả thiết cái cùng mà đi chờ ba là biết cho nên tôi khi ba có miêu là có tôi khi yeah.
Thật sự nè, ok, nhớ trong sẽ là cũng biết họ ba thọ, cũng nhớ họ ok Wisconsin nó tua, cũng cho nó còn họ họ ok, trong sẽ hiệnวันนี้sẽ được tua còn biết thế, thọ cái này sẽ biết họ video nó có cho nên từ họ bảo cho cái cái thọ ice store rồi là cái cái nhớ họ cái chemical nó thế này à, so group của họ họ ok nó biết ba tin nên cho một bọn ba thế biết baเลยcho cái qua civil engagement 也好比如是上啦 so 如是是那时天你给我 pass 没着 Linda
Okay, nhớ rằng cứ luôn bây giờ Linda, cứ họ lời chia sẻ anh nó nè, bây lúc họ bây giờ ba, bọn này tuân sản lúa cho lúa đó, cái chỉ sau cái ba, sẽ đơn nên thì cái chế ha, chỉ tạo nên là I think họ conversation bây giờ muốn nói is very important bây cho lúc community thế đó sẽ đơn này so giờ thì nó share cái share that chỉ nó cái share được bao tiêu bao giờ vậy đấy chỉ là Holocaust nó chỉ biết từ bao đâu hay đấy chỉ Holocaust ấy thông bờ lúc state thế thông bờ để cho mình cái nó mua bây giờ mua community members in China cho cho cũng mua phải tức tại cái final orders cũng mua cho chỉ tao tại cũng mua là in China hết bây giờ Holocaust nó hay đấy cho từ mua sẵn sàng rồi chỉ checking về không mua misinformation and so you have to any cái ba or ID chiếu rồi ni thì cái paperwork for you know the cái immigration paperwork là đó chỉ nói chỉ hỗ trợ để bé thì cái nó so I just added that yeah I'll pass it on to Jong.
Linda, cái hay trong cũng có. Nhớ trong trên từ của lúc bây giờ trong của họ lựa tới lúc con học phải để mình bé họ nhớ họ mà là từ Wisconsin, bé họ lựa ba cho ba niên du cho mình nhận du cho LGBTQ là do cho chạy tu chạy bé họ lựa ba tổ cho ba niên theo tổ Southeast Asian so lựa cho Hmong coming thêm lo mua cái chỉ số mua cái nhiều xe là chỉ là bé ba lời bé linh ba dây sau ba nhà cho ba nhà菜罗贴着都罗都年都菜年菜，然后就菜上个都上个菜上豆要就都贴就蒙so yeah nếu nó bé plan work khó lại nó là bây giờ bé linh bỏ tiền mua khó issue nữa cho immigration law nè bây giờ bé linh bỏ tiền cho nữa bé cho mong thì bé họ chỉ cho bảo tiền có impact cho lý trả nè để chỉ bé linh bảo tiền hậu bé hay nên mong bé linh mua cho tin này lên đã hay linh mua final orders là thế rồi thế chờ để chống lo là để chờ thái là để là chỉ bảo bé chỉ tao bảo tiền sau là bật giải mong là chỉ giải mong để chỉ ý là lý hải ninh thì bé lên yếu tố sai thế sĩ thải thì bé yếu ở đâyแต่是 nó yếu protect biết the king protect biết yếu hải ninh mà yếu thì bây giờ thì mình nói bây giờ sĩ thải nó bây giờ hay lưu mong theo hay lưu mi cả hết cái bây giờ những sự bảo vệ thì yếu ở đây yếu họ mua cho nát quân right cho ice là yếu cho police 但是 nóเลยhọตัวเขาอยู่เขาต้องเลยyếuตัวเดียวอยู่ได้เช่อยู่จะเช่ปุ่นต่างมวยเลยyếuน้องอยู่ที่อยู่ไปมั่วนั่นเดี๋ยวเนี่ยเขาติดเนาะbây giờ mua bây giờ半年ที่เลยhọ chỉ mua nó đỡ bây giờ bỏ hay thì bây giờ mua cho tín hình bây giờ họ lớn đóเลยต้องมู check in bây giờเลยต้องมู check in ไป government เลยเด้อbây giờถาลิจ่า safety plan ลิจ่าอยู่ถอยอยู่มู walk อยู่ขอ immigration check in เลยเด้ออยู่ไปเพื่ออยู่ตัวคิงลิจ่าแต่bây giờ bỏได้เหมือนนอนได้เลยแต่bây giờเลยเดียมันเอาbây giờ muaขอชิถาลิเนาะวันนี้วันนี้bây giờ okay yep Joanne 俾埋呢 explain 個歌但是วันนี้คนเดินนะกูสาintroduce big Lu coalition น้องได้จ้ะเดี๋ยวกูมาลี pass ต่อไปตัว expertไปinvite มันเนาะนูมาลี explain จนเดี๋ยวต่อไป okay so มันเนาะไป Lu coalition Lu community power building coalition อย่ารู้host ไปขอ live นู่นเนาะไปขอ community power coalition based how Wisconsin ไปa bunch of Hmong black organizations so yeah, we need to not so power up or clear like yet yes yeah in your La Crosse, Howard and your Pupe Milwaukee they've been more freedom in Madison 俾我我 look 個漢字 here แต่ชิมันนอนเลยเขาต้อง共識到俾我個 African American Round Table ที่Metcalf Community Metcalf Park Community Bridges ในย่อ Milwaukee เลยเขาชิคงตัวมันนอแต่ชิมันนอไปขอ focus ในย่อให้เตียไปอยู่ท่าตัวไปหายที่มงให้เตียส่วนก็ได้เหมือนเนาะชีสับแค่ตอนนี้เดียเป็นลูก coalition เนาะลูก coalitionมองเทียบย้อนดูว่าเขารู้เกี่ยวกับลูก state of Wisconsin to really identify the issues เทียอยู่เบลเบคอ community power เลยจ้าไปไปหายหนึ่งไปว่าเขารู้เนาะเดี๋ยวไปหายหนึ่งซื้อจิตเอาไปอยู่ตรงนั้นลูกได้ other หายหนึ่งว่าเขาหรือ basically build the big power to make powerful changes specifically if we're thinking about policy changes right especially in this moment so แต่ชินอกุมาลี pass over ต่อไปตัวguest honor expert to introduce the king here also really explain ICE to deportation to the immigration and know your rights ต่อไป so จะกุมาลี attorney จะกุมาลีเกี่ยวก็รอ show stage เนาะ
Hi, như trong ý trong phương thế nên là cũng lúc hiện giờ và cũng thực lý cho I've been working as an immigration attorney for almost 23, 24 years. I started my practice actually in Wisconsin with a nonprofit called the Wisconsin Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So going bo that are represented on Jong Tie going or that are represented tonight. So I'm really glad to be able to come back and join you all this evening. So first and foremost, I just want to thank you all for inviting me and letting me share some information with you all tonight. I want to first also just acknowledge that this is a really important topic. And it's unfortunate that we have to have this conversation, but I think that it's important to be educated to allow our community to be empowered and not live in fear. And so for me to be able to share this information allows us to be able to share so that we can help educate our community. That being said, I will just provide a caveat that the information that we're going to share is going to be heavily in English because a lot of this information is going to be very difficult for me to translate or Thai Lumong. So please just bear with me that Yalu Beya Hide are going to be a bit legalese and complex, but I'll try my best to explain it in English and Hmonglish, as we just joked a little bit earlier, but feel free to ask questions in the chat and kumamua opportunity to answer as best as I can. So first, my background, I currently actually practice, I'm a legal director with Catholic Charities of Archdiocese in Dubuque, Iowa. So I live in Dubuque, Iowa. I lead a team of 4 attorneys and legal assistants, and our focus is really representing immigrants in family-based humanitarian immigration and deportation defense in Iowa. And so the topic that we're talking about is actually very familiar with the work that we do. And so, Mono, I'm going to talk to you and share some information specifically about Know Your Rights and what our community can do to prepare yourself. We all have constitutional rights, regardless of our immigration status, regardless of who our parents are, regardless of our ethnic background, what language we speak, what food we eat. And so, Mano, we're going to hopefully give you some tools that you can take with you so that you can share with your family and your friends and community so that we can all help protect each other. Okay? So that being said, let's start off by just talking a little bit about some resources. The slide that you're seeing right now, I want everybody, and hopefully I think you all can take a look at this, is there are a lot of wonderful free resources online. There is an organization called the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. This is a website that I would encourage you and your organizations to Google, and they have Know Your Rights card that you can order for free or print off. What you're seeing here is an actual template that you can print and download from the computer and carry with you. This is a card that helps to remind you what you can say if you are in a situation where you are in a situation where you are being approached by the police or immigration authorities and you're not sure what to say, but you know you have to remain silent because you may not want to say anything until you know exactly what you should or should not say, okay? So it's really important that you have these cards to help remind you in a time of crisis, okay? So let's start off. Everybody in the United States, doesn't matter what your immigration status is, you all have constitutional protections. And tonight we're gonna talk about 3 main constitutional protections. The first one is the 4th Amendment. Everyone has a right to be free from unreasonable and illegal searches and seizures, right? And we're going to talk about how that looks in what context. The other constitutional protection that we're going to talk about is the 5th Amendment. This is the right to remain silent, which references the card that I just showed you, the earlier slide, that you have a right to remain silent and not say anything to incriminate yourself. And the other protection that we're going to touch on is the 6th Amendment is in a criminal context, you have a right to legal counsel, okay? So some of you, we use the term ICE in the context of immigration law, Immigration law, that govern, if you are not a citizen born in the United States, or naturalized or applied to become a United States, you are governed and you have to follow immigration law. And under immigration law, there is a department called the federal department called Department of Homeland Security, okay? And underneath the Department of Homeland Security, there are 2 executive office or branches that are responsible for making sure that non-citizens follow immigration law, okay? And tonight we're going to touch on the one specific branch that oftentimes people hear of quite lately. It's called Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So oftentimes people hear the term ICE, I-C-E, which is a short acronym for it, right? So what is ICE and who are ICE agents? Okay, ICE agents are federal law enforcement officers who are responsible for enforcing immigration laws, okay? Usually they are found within the interior of the United States, but they also sometimes can help provide support for border protection, either by sea or land at the airports or at ports of entry. They are responsible for investigating and enforcing and detaining and removing non-citizens, okay? Another branch of the Department of Homeland Security that sometimes you guys may hear of is Customs and Border Patrol agents. These are federal law enforcement agents who are usually responsible for border protection and control, usually at the southern or northern border or at land or sea ports of entry. So remember, if you travel internationally and you come back into the United States, at Customs, you may see Customs and Border Patrol agents, right? They'll be looking for contraband or things that you shouldn't bring back into the United States. Those are CPP agents that may be looking to make sure that you aren't bringing in things that are illegal, but they're also going to be looking at enforcing immigration laws as well. But tonight we're going to be focusing on ICE agents as officers that you may have to interact with if you find yourself in a situation. So let's talk a little bit about scenarios where you may have to encounter ICE, okay? Oftentimes people ask, okay, what if the police or ICE comes to my home and they knock on the door? What do I do? So when we talk about your legal constitutional protections, okay, remember I said ICE is a federal agent that is governed by federal immigration law. So ICE is not the same as a law enforcement officer in that sense. ICE is governed by an administrative federal agency, okay? So ICE can come to your home, and there are generally two ways in which they are legally allowed into your home. They can be allowed into your home if you verbally or physically let them in by opening your door, okay? Or they have a valid search warrant, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about what does a valid search warrant look like, okay? So in the context, if ICE comes knocking at your door, we advise and talk to people about how do you approach the situation. First and foremost, ICE should not be let in your house. So that means don't open the door. You should be asking ICE officers for identification to verify that the person says that they are ICE or they are law enforcement. So yet if you live in La Crosse and you see someone at the door that you don't recognize and they say, I'm with ICE, I need to come into your house, you want to ask who they are and ask for their identification. Depending on how your house is built, depending how your door is built, you may not have a window or see-through window, right? So then how do you ensure and verify the identification? So you may have to be creative about doing that without opening the door, because as soon as you open your door, that means you may be giving permission to ICE or law enforcement to come into your house, okay? So what we want to teach people is you need to be creative about how can you verify the identity of the person on the other side. Do you want to say, can you slip your identification under the door so I can see your identification? Or do you want to say, wait outside, don't come in, I'll exit the house so I can see and verify your identification? So there are many ways in which you can verify the identification of the person without opening the door and letting them inside your house. Same thing, if you want to verify if they have a valid search warrant, ask them to slip the search warrant under the door, okay? Those are things that you want to do before you even crack open the door to let them in. It's really important because as soon as you open the door, that gives ICE and police the kind of assumption that you've allowed and given the permission to come inside the house. So this means you have to train your entire family, whoever lives in your house, from grandma Netayotsi to the little 5-year-old. Everyone in the house who lives in the house needs to be trained on what your protocol should be if people come knocking your door. If you are not expecting visitors, and Pemoma, we get a lot of visitors that are unexpected. It's really important that during these times, everyone in the household should be trained to say who should be opening the door, and if you are if you are not expecting visitors, what should be the protocol. Okay. Now, if for some reason you forget and someone does open the door and ICE does make their way into the door, it's important that you communicate to the ICE officer if there are children, if there are people in the home that's elderly or sick, and if ICE doesn't have a valid search warrant, you need to verbalize out loud that they are not permitted to enter and ask them to leave. And even if they don't leave, you can document what they're doing, right? You can pay attention to where the officer is searching, and you can document or even take your cell phone and photograph what they're doing. The important thing is, do not obstruct what they're doing, because if you obstruct what they're doing, you potentially could also then be arrested if potentially you physically interfere with what they're doing, even though they may not have a valid search warrant to be in your house. Okay. So those are some things that you want to just be reminded of in that context if ICE makes their way inside your house. Now, let's talk a little bit about what is a valid search warrant. Now, generally, every state is going to have slightly different format of what a valid search warrant is. And this is a confusing piece, because a valid search warrant, even though states have different formats for it, the essential pieces of a search warrant are, it has to be a judicial warrant. It is not the same as an immigration warrant. And I'm going to show you photos of or visual examples of what a search warrant looks like versus an immigration warrant. Okay. A valid judicial search warrant has to be signed by a judge or a magistrate. It has to contain the actual physical address of the home that is listed to be searched. And it has to specify the area in which ICE or police is planning to search, right? And it just can't just say, we're looking for a general area, right? Now, if ICE or the police officers do not have a search warrant, you continually need to verbalize that you do not give them consent to search your home, right? You have to keep asserting that. Even if they're in your home, this is you making the record that you do not consent to let the police officer or ICE to be in your home, searching through your home, okay? So this is an example of what a search warrant may look like, right? So the red arrows, it says search warrant. It has an address. It's signed by a judge, and it provides a specific place of where the search is going to be conducted and the items that they're looking for. And it's signed on the bottom by a judge or a magistrate, right? That's what a search warrant looks like generally in most states, okay? It could be signed by a federal judge or it could be signed by a state judge, okay? Similarly, a valid arrest warrant in most states also need to be signed by a judge or a magistrate. It has to specify the name of the person that they're looking for, right? So if they're saying they're looking for Zer Vang, but they see Zong opening the door, they can't say, oh, hey, Zong Vang sounds familiar, but they can't just arrest Zong just because Zong and I may have the same last name, right? So you want to make sure, and I know this is hard for people because it's really intimidating because they're being confronted by a law enforcement officer, whether it's ICE or actually a local police officer, right? But you want to be able to inspect and ask to see the arrest warrant or the search warrant. So in this case, an arrest warrant similarly needs to be signed by a judge. It has to spell out the full name of the person they're looking for, right? And the person has to be described generally in the arrest warrant. Now, here's an example. If the police knock on the door or ICE knocks on the door and they actually do have an arrest warrant only, but they don't have a search warrant, here's the tricky part. They come knocking on the door and ICE says, we have an arrest warrant. and we are looking for Zer Vang. And this is an arrest warrant. It's signed by a judge here in La Crosse, Wisconsin. She is named here, and she's listed at this address. We want to come inside the house and arrest her. And if I'm in that home, what you want to be careful is you don't want to open the door and let the police officer in the home and then start looking for everybody that they want to arrest just because they think Zer's in there. What you want to do is you want to say, well, can we inspect the arrest warrant and make sure it's a valid arrest warrant? And then you can say, well, we can see if Zer is the person you're looking for, if she is in this house. And if she is in this house, we will send her outside. So if Zer is in the house, if I'm in the house, you send me outside. You don't let the police officer or ICE inside the house, okay? The arrest warrant alone does not let ICE or police inside your house. So that is a distinction I want people to remember. So an arrest warrant, here's an example of an arrest warrant. Granted, this is an Iowa example, but it should carry the same. It should clearly identify the person, name of the person. It should be signed by a judge, right? And those are things that you want to look for when you're trying to identify if this is a valid search warrant and or arrest warrant. Now, I want to also talk a little bit about, sometimes we get questions about, well, what if you get stopped in your car? How do you deal with that scenario? You know, and the car is a bit of a gray area because depending on the state that you're in, different laws apply, right? And so I might have to verify this, but in Wisconsin, depending on where you live, this is where you want to verify. But in Wisconsin, if you get pulled over, let's say you have a broken tail light and the cop pulls you over, and it's not even ICE, but it's just a cop. You're going to be asked to provide your identification, proof of license, etc. Where I live in Wisconsin, we have to provide proof of driver's license, you know, your registration and insurance. And beyond that, that's it, right? Now, if I'm carrying a passenger, my passenger does not need to provide his or her identification at all. They don't need to say anything. Even if the cop says, you know, ask my passenger who they are, under Iowa law, they don't need to identify themselves. In Wisconsin and in other states, we want to make sure that that's also the same. So we'll have to do some research. And this is where, you know, our community group here should do some research to figure out in Wisconsin if that holds true too. And so the bottom line is, if the cops don't have a reasonable suspicion or reasonable belief to search your car, they don't have a reason to do so. If they smell or see something in plain view in your car, they see a beer can, if they see, let's say, you know, a marijuana joint or something, then they may have a reasonable suspicion to search your car, right? The most important thing is to remain calm and remain silent, provide and comply with the law, but you need to verbalize. If the cop says, I want to search your car, you can say, I do not consent to a search, because they don't have a reasonable basis to search your car, okay? So these are things that are important for you all to remember. I think what I would like to do is chat a little bit about in the context where if someone does get detained by ICE and what happens and some things that people may need to consider, especially for people who are non-citizens. For our Hmong community, we have a large population and a diverse population of Hmong who are citizens, people who still are LPRs and green card holders for years and years and years, and people who came as refugees and had LPRs and then committed a crime and then have final orders of deportation, but because they can't be removed back to Laos, they are under orders of supervision. That is, we have a whole gamut of people who occupy different immigration statuses. So in this current situation, I think it's really important for people to know their immigration status, know and have a copy of the immigration documents, keep it in a safe place, make copies of it, put it in a safe place in record keeping with a safe family member. So in the case of a situation where you may be detained, your loved ones or trusted family member knows where that's at. And if they need to retain an attorney, they can provide that information to your immigration attorney to be able to figure out what the best recourse is for you. Okay. Now, obviously, some things to remember if you encounter ICE or law enforcement. Do not, I mean, some of these are pretty common sense, but it bears repeating. Don't run away from law enforcement authorities. Obviously, if you attempt to flee or run, that just makes things worse. Do not resist or fight with ICE or law enforcement. Do not provide a false name or documents or lie to law enforcement authorities about your identity or activities. Obviously, don't argue or persuade or negotiate with authorities. Ultimately, the thing we want you to remember, and this is why we want to have you all carry those Know Your Rights card, is you always have a right to remain silent, right? If you need to, you should just provide the basic identification about who you are, and that's about it. Other than that, you don't need to say anything. You can say, I choose to remain silent. I want to speak to my lawyer, and that's all you have to say. Those are the things that we want people to remember in this context. A couple things I want to also share. If you are a citizen of the United States, if you haven't applied for your passport yet, I would encourage you to do so. And I would actually encourage you to apply for both your passport and the passport card. In these circumstances, I wish I didn't have to say this, but I think that it's fair that because we look the way we do, we are not white people. I think it's fair that there could be a lot of racial profiling that will be happening. And if you can't show that you are a citizen, you might fall into a collateral detention, arrest, deportation, unless you can prove that you are a citizen, right? We have heard stories literally just in the last 2 weeks about citizens being detained and arrested just because ICE, thought that they looked like they could be undocumented. And if you are not a citizen of the U.S., or maybe you have a green card, make sure you keep your green card in a safe space or in a safe place so that you can access it quickly if you need to. Okay, so some things that you may want to consider if you haven't done so, particularly if you might be in the category of high risk for detention and deportation. It's important for you to go consult with an immigration attorney now so that you can understand what your legal options may be, make a safety plan if you need to, figure out if something happens to you and you get detained and arrested and are in detention for months and months and months. Who's going to take care of your children? If you have children, who's going to take care of your property and finances? All these things are decisions that you don't want to make in a crisis decision. You want to be able to think about that clearly at this moment so you can make the right decisions with your family. Okay. I think I want to just spend a couple more minutes to talk a little bit about risk assessment for those who are at high risk of deportation, detention. This is an issue that is constantly kind of a fluid moment. In the last 2 weeks, this administration has issued, over 80 different executive orders that impact immigration law rules. In the past, literally, we have seen how this administration has viewed immigrants, not just lawfully legal residents, but individuals who have lived here for many years and have legal status, but also individuals who have been here undocumented. Individuals, those groups are all kind of lumped into one and the same and have now been considered potentially all consideration for deportation particularly if you've had any contact with law enforcement, particularly if you've had any contact with criminal, if you have a criminal history. And so if you've had a prior removal order, meaning you've had a prior deportation order, you've met with an immigration judge has ordered you deported, and for whatever reason, particularly in this community, in our Hmong community, you can't be deported back to Laos or Thailand, you are at a high risk of being detained. And because you can't be deported physically, you may be sitting in ICE detention for months and months and months and months and months. There's a lot of conversations about this administration wanting to detain people and build detention centers throughout the United States and detaining folks. So these are folks who are going to be at high risk. People with prior removal orders, people who had removal orders and did not leave the United States, people who failed to appear for their immigration court hearing, so then they were ordered deported or removed in absentia for missing their immigration court, people who are what we consider undocumented and do not have lawful status in the United States. So these are categories of people who are going to be at high risk. People who are also considered a high risk would be people who entered the United States, even if they entered in lawfully, and now have their visas expired. They are also going to be at high risk. The United States, through the latest executive orders, are now also considering what we call expedited removal to beyond the border. Up until literally 2 weeks ago, there was a policy that said expedited removal, meaning that generally this was just considered within 100 miles of the border, would be reserved for people who arrived at a border or port of entry, land or sea, within 100 miles, could be removed immediately without having a chance to talk to an immigration judge. Now, with the executive orders, that rule has now been expanded into the interior. So in theory, ICE could detain people in Wisconsin, in Iowa, in Minnesota, and engage in expedited removal, especially if a person cannot show that they've been here for more than 2 years. And this is why it's a careful balance of carrying documents to show that you've been here for 2 years or more, but yet not necessarily carrying your passport, because does that make your foreign passport, because does that make you easier for ICE to deport you? And so those are things that you may want to discuss with an immigration attorney, right? And so generally, people who are low risk would be folks who are citizens and people who have green card, especially if they, particularly if they have not committed crimes. So I wanted to just share those, risk assessment for people to consider. And especially if you are concerned and you're in that kind of high risk category, you need to consult with an immigration attorney. Okay. And I'm going to leave it at that. And if there are more questions about warrants or arrest warrants or judicial warrants, I'd be happy to dive in a little bit deeper for that. So I'll take a pause here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nzaru, for going through all of that with us, right? I know it's a lot of information that we just went through, but I'm really grateful that Monoko Hoto Kia Bay to all of the rights that we have as citizens and to go through all of this in detail. We have a few questions on Facebook that I'd like to bring up. And so one of them is if ICE approach an open garage, you don't invite them in as well, right? So if your garage door is open, or if you're, and they come through that, do you invite them in, or how does that work if the door's open?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where it's great because your home is considered a private property, right? And so if you have an open garage, that is going to be seen as an invitation for ICE to come in, right? So close everything up. Close your garage, close your door. So don't invite them in by opening your garage and your door. So even if you have your garage door slightly open or ajar or half open, right, depending on how your garage is set up, I think it's very. I think people need to be very careful and cautious that, I kind of joke because, us Hmong people, we love to cook in our garages. Our garages are second kitchens for a lot of us. And so I think, and living room spaces. And so I think it's really important to protect our families who may be at high risk, that we be thoughtful that in these situations that we don't expose our loved ones for potential ICE enforcement actions by keeping our garages wide open, keeping our doors wide open in that context, especially if you have someone who is staying with you or visiting you that could be in this high risk for deportation. And even if you don't have someone, I think it's traumatizing for ICE to approach and I think just harass or cause a lot of disruption in the home. So, and please remember, ICE is known to use different tactics. They're not going to be wearing uniforms. They could be wearing plain clothes, driving unmarked cars. So these are situations that people need to be prepared for, right? And so I think it's entirely possible ICE will always use or generally use tactics to deceive people to try to get access into your home.
Thank you, Enzo. I think that's the scary part for our community, right? Because child authorities, right? And so if someone dressed up as a police officer or someone shows up to the door that then I think our elders, I'm thinking about, the folks in our community, your low, your chipo, right? And then they didn't to call, even though and police officer out, clothes or uniform or whatnot. If it's just to call usually big your they will open the door, right? And so I think the message is really clear that you didn't chip out right? That's the safest, I think, assumption that we can make, that you could right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the I think beto practice. Yeah, I think maybe some of the things that we can do for the community is practice, even doing role play, right? To practice, because the more we practice, how to say, I don't consent. Even especially when I work with the immigrant population, how do they say, I don't consent, or I choose to remain silent, right? So could be really confusing and hard. So I think it's really important. We need to help elders allow to practice some of those easy phrases so that they can practice that too.
Yes, definitely. So I encourage you to your elders, mukhe here so your rights now, because I know that there's no how big there's a lot of like misinformation going around regarding like ICE and like detain and so there's a lot of like things going on in social media altogether like that. So this next question is from Chia Va, and she's asking, earlier we mentioned where officers are searching and taking pictures. She's wondering if we are also allowed to like record them.
Yes, and you have to be careful, right? Because the thing that you want to do is you can record, but you have to do it safely. You can capture, record, photo their actions. I think documenting the name, identification, the badge number, note down how many officers were there, the time, date, location of the encounter. Those are all things that can be helpful. But again, do not interfere. Do not physically get in the middle of ICE trying to search or apprehend someone. I think that is going to cause more trouble than good, right? So if, let's say, you are in the house and ICE is able to get into the house and you are verbally saying, I don't consent to this search, I'm going to be recording and documenting what you're doing. And if you don't have your phone with you, and it's in your bedroom, but you don't feel safe going to your bedroom because law enforcement authority, I see that as you fleeing or leaving, and it could cause more harm, you might just need to stand there and just observe with your eyes and just make sure that you can recall everything. And as soon as they leave, you need to write down everything that you can remember.
Thank you. We have another question from Ba Dao, and I think you went over this a little bit earlier, but maybe we can give a quick summary about this question about what should or can one say if an arrest warrant for someone is inside the home.
So the example I give is, so if law enforcement or ICE does produce a valid arrest warrant, right? Remember I mentioned an arrest warrant is only valid to arrest a person. It does not allow ICE or police inside a home to search a home. So what we usually share with people is that if ICE or law enforcement has an arrest warrant and you can verify that it is truly an arrest warrant, then if the person is inside the home, what you can say through the door to the law enforcement officer is let me inspect to verify that this is an arrest warrant and that person may or may not be here. If that person is here, we'll send the person outside, right? So that you don't let the law enforcement officer inside the home. Because if you let the law enforcement inside the home, then potentially you're exposing everybody else in the home for additional what we call collateral arrests, right? So, I think the less you can let law enforcement officers or ICE inside the home, the better. So the wiser thing to do is to say, okay, if you have an arrest warrant for Zaba, then if she is in the house, we will send her outside to you, and you can arrest her and take her away. But you cannot come in here because you don't have a search warrant to come inside the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think this is going to be our last question because we want to also take some time to offer some resources for community and then talk about something that's happening here in Wisconsin. But our next question is from Nancy, and she's asking us to discuss what is detention center like. So what does it look like? Where is it? And then kind of like the process, like what happens there if someone is detained in detention center.
So detention centers all look differently because we're in the process. So ICE. So throughout the United States, there are field offices for ICE officers, and so I believe in Wisconsin, Milwaukee may have a local ICE office. And I will tell you, most ICE offices are not big. They may have, capacity to hold a few individuals. What generally happens is ICE offices have what they call agreements with local jails and local detention centers, right? So let's use, for example, La Crosse, okay? So La Crosse County, or in Milwaukee, if the ICE office in Milwaukee doesn't have capacity and they end up arresting and detaining 100 immigrants, and they don't have enough bed space or room at the local ICE detention center there, if they have an agreement with the local jail in Milwaukee, they may house the immigrants with the local jail, right? So detention centers vary. I think depending on how they're processed, many people who are arrested, they get processed at the local field office to make sure, is this Nzova, this is her immigration history, she falls into this category, she's going to be processed. Maybe she does or does not qualify for bond, so she's going to be moved to the next detention center, and she might then be relocated to Chicago or a different detention center, right? So there is a online website operated by ICE that in theory you can put in a immigrant's alien number to find out where the alien is being located. But I will tell you that under this certain situation, I don't know how reliable that is these days, right? So detention centers are going to vary across the board. Detention centers are not going to be necessarily the same across the United States. I know that's been in the news quite a bit because of this administration's intention to build large detention centers by private companies and turning Guantanamo Bay into like a 30,000 bed detention center. There's just a lot of unknowns, but generally right now, ICE right now doesn't have enough beds. There's like 30,000 or 40,000 beds only, detention center beds only in the United States. And that's why a lot of immigrants are on release because they do check-ins because there's just not enough space to hold them. And so it remains to be seen with this kind of mass deportation plan where they're going to put all these people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in doing this work, we've heard of like people that's been detained, right? And no one can find out where they like went to or where they were being held. So I think that's like right now, it's really scary, right? To think about like, okay, with all of like everything that's going on and what you just talked about with creating more beds and like creating more private companies to like hold detainees. I think it's really scary to think about like our friends and family like just getting picked up and then not knowing where they are going to end up at or where they're going to go.
Right. And so but I think the important thing for people who do get picked up and detained is that's why the things that I mentioned about if you get detained, remember these things, right? Remember your A number, remember where you were detained, try to remember who took you in and where they took you to, because you might get an opportunity to call a lawyer or call a loved one and ask, right? Keep asking until you're able to call someone and then call someone and then let that person know where you're being held, because it's entirely possible you may still be there or they may move you to a different detention center, right? So communication quickly is vital to being able to get access to representation and justice.
Yes, thank you for that reminder. I know we don't have a lot of time for questions, but one of our folks on social media is asking this question. I think it's so important for us to like really highlight this, right? Because a lot of our folks that may get detained or may come across ICE, and so like Cindy Jones asking, what do a person do when no one in the house speaks English and ICE is there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real question and that's a real dilemma. And I think that, you know, that's a realistic situation, and that happens all the time. And I think this is where our community needs to come together and help provide resources. I know that in different communities, for example, here where I live, the Spanish speaking community has put together on a somewhat secure platform Signal, where people can download an app that if they don't speak English and they need assistance, they can quickly access someone who could help translate on the phone, right? But again, it's not the same as having a live person in that room at that moment to help interpret or to help speak on behalf of the person who is being detained or being arrested, right? So I don't have a solution for that. I think what's important is for the person who is being detained and doesn't speak English well. I think it's really important that those Know Your Rights card that I shared in the beginning, people should carry that. It is not a magical card, but it does have it in English and in Hmong so that people can assert their right to remain silent, and family members need to then follow up and get a hold of an attorney so that they can figure out where their loved one is being held and follow up with figuring how to provide representation for the person that's being detained.
Yeah, thank you. And we will also be sharing the links to to the Know Your Rights Code documents, so then folks can also print them out if they're not in the area with the organization that they can go pick them up at. But thank you so much, Zoe, for really helping us out today and really showcasing to our community the importance of knowing your rights and things that we should be doing and should be very cognizant and can thought about, right, as we go into this year with all of the things that are happening with immigration and all of that. So next, I'm going to invite Lena to come up and share some resources that we have in Wisconsin that can
Yeah, Wachanza again for going through some of the rights, right, that people should have and should know. So yali pa hai ku yo khemin ji chai tia yani san thia ke pa yo mu thia do yo ko ho tu thia an thia do ka tu na ya. So one day no je mo lu Immigration Advocates Network. Ibrahim ali cho yo link yo to ho ko ni ho nhìn tôi khi tôi muốn đầu website thế này ya. Lúc con học Immigration Advocates Network nói ya tia có sẵn những cái ban chân đời tôi nên là sự chế độ cao lâu là si ba chân này có mấy cái case này ya sân immigration je rồi hôm mua cho cái ban đời thế rồi mà liên thiệt connect con thôi cho nên我包这ใจ等等呢有了八个这个 case je等待呢还要如果好 ACLU rồi mua đâu ya cỡ thế kia cho hay tiệt có mua chạy đã chỉ nó giờ cái tụi immigrant rồi có họ mua cho chạy đã chỉ là ba tỷ thấy có về总之nói lúc immigrant legal resource center nó có mua cái ba chân tới cho chạy thế này giờ giờ thì có sao cần gì là chỉ sao bảo thì sẽ mua cái ba chỉ có mà liên muốn tới lúc website nữa thiệt về chỉ ta lấy nó có website và tận đây nó về cho so that we have rights.us nó là hôm nay cho resource cho có những gì thế cần gì chân tới sẽ có mua chạy đó chỉ là ba tỷ thấy con này ạ chỉ có cái nó có resource gì bên mua nó do deportation defense manual so đại manual nó chỉ nếu hôm mua đâu giờ là kia cho the coi deportation nó giờ có mua đó chỉ là ba tỷ thấy có lô là chỉ cho nên rồi nhớ rồi có chỉ nên cái chụp hình để lời họ muốn cởi tao đi trả lô là ba đi trả ba trong này có họ case thế này vậy yeah so trên đây cho resource thì bây giờ cho link cho họ bây giờ comments rồi so giờ này sẽ báo gì nó chỉ nếu mà muốn nhìn đó giờ để này họ chỉ báo lên đó này họ ní cái giờ cho nên họ báo là mong theo lô nó chỉ nếu mà đi hút tua rồi bây giờ cùng họ thế này vậy vì họ để bây giờ cho link tới chỉ bên mà đi họ khi thế mà đi họ đã thả cho tiền là mua cái ba đã chi thế Yeah, I think after that, bé sát cho manga này giờ này giờ ít thứ leader in the bé cho group cho con họ nó thế này là bé mình chỉ trong the ít lại article ở những khóa tờ này giờ. So if we can have let's see. Yep, Manka, I'm handing it over to you.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Manka. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I work at Freedom Inc. and also Freedom Action Now. I'm here to discuss the state of our state and what we have been observing as what is going on right now ever since the executive orders and Trump came into power and took office. I'm going to try to be succinct so that someone can, translate for me after I speak. So if I'm going too fast, just let me know, flag me down, and I'll go a little bit slower. So a few things are happening right now. And I want to, at the beginning, just land for all those who are watching and everyone who calls themselves our community. I'm talking about Black folks, Southeast Asian folks, immigrants, refugees, queer and trans folks in our communities. I want to land the fact that increased militarism in any form negatively impacts us all, even those of us who are considered citizens, right? And what I mean by that is that it increases fear and police terrorism, right? It allows them to run through our communities and question people and stop people and bust in people's homes, which is never good for any of us. And I want to ask everyone watching, how do you and I look to an ICE agent? Daily quotas set by Trump are causing them to detain first and ask questions later. So what does that mean, again, for those of us, even those of us who are quote unquote citizens, right? And then consider the fact that increases in funding and infrastructure to policing in all of its forms, right? That's what this does. What happens to the extra facilities and the extra ICE beds that folks are talking about earlier that are going to be needed to carry out these mass raids, the extra tactical gear, all of the coordination between the police and the sheriffs and ICE? What happens when they're done with this round of ICE raids? Do you think they're going to return the money back and convert those spaces to community centers? No, they're going to look for a way to continue using them for their intended purpose, which is to detain Black and brown people. So in Madison, just talking about what's happening in our state, around our state, in Madison, ICE is already impersonating MPD and using fascist tactics to confuse and coerce people into incriminating themselves. I myself got a call from someone calling unknown and yelling at me repeatedly saying, hey, this is MPD, where is so-and-so? Don't lie to us, don't lie to us. That's already happening. And I only know that these are fascist tactics because it sounds like what my dad described when the military came for him before he had to flee Liberia during the Civil War. At the Capitol building, Republican legislatures who control our state assembly and Senate are calling for policy that could force sheriff departments and local counties. At the state legislature, where these law makers are supposed to be trying to create a world that is better for us all, where we can all live and thrive and live happy lives, they're trying to find a way to pull funding from county level agencies if they do not cooperate with ICE. So if they don't turn over information, if they don't turn over office space, if they don't turn over jail space. And those of you who have been rocking with us for a while have known that we've led a campaign called Build the People, Not the Jails for over a decade now to try to stop the expansion of Dane County Jail. They have been pouring billions of dollars into building new jails, and now it's time for them to fill it. So I just wanted to make those connections and share some of the things that are going on, and I'll yield my time for someone to come on and translate.
Yeah, thanks, Manga. So, ขอ Manga ถามจริงๆเนาะนะอย่า giờ hay chơi tiệt tại chỉ nói nhớ được hồi lú ấy sinh Wisconsin nó là mỗi chơi nên và sở chế nhớ được hồi lú ấy sinh Wisconsin nó là xã chỉ rất chạy lo hay cho có chơi tôi chính sử nhớ được hồi chơi rồi nhớ là Wisconsin nó nhớ có là cái tệ và họ luyện cho ice agent nó nè so là chính xã chỉ rất chạy lên đó đó chỉ mà bé xã kia đó sợ được báo lên đó nó nhỏ hay tại chỉ nó mà ice nữ ít bá họ bù lý mà nữ ít bá nó nhỏ cho tôi chính sử nữ ít bá lấy chịu họ lựa cái nó nhỏ đó chỉ mà lời xã chỉ rất chạy nó là có ở bá nữa thôi cái tay họ lựa cái nó giờ thì tôi chính sử nữ hơn tay tao bây giờ nên lo là xin tay tay tao nên là mua cho nó chỉ này like felony charge này giờ chỉ lỡ xã có cho police nó họ lo sai sẽ lỡ bây giờ nên ở một sẵn sàng nhất là tới cho mình cả nó thiên nó nè như bây giờ khi đó sẽ được báo lên tới hay tiền lỡ sĩ khỏi chú ý nó lo hệ bé sẽ đời này giờ có bé hôn trai thế có bé chỉ báo hay tiền bé nhận tranh tao lên từ nó nè ở bên bỏ hay tiền lỡ ua tao lỡ mua cho chú ý nó lỡ tu ua đua lo là nó giờ những chỉ cho chú ý chia thế mà ở lỡ những ua đua lo lỡ những báo tiền lỡ những ít chịu lên tới hệ bé có bé chỉ chop báo hay tiền有冇錢嘅把個對貼有冇個對貼你把貼地睇到邊那樣嘅只打領導例如真係呢例如攞我到個mỗi年gì đó cho tôi chính sự nhất là họ cho rồi nhất họ Wisconsin nó thế này giờ có lỡ họ mua cho không à lỡ ni là giờ mu tây tin nên lo mu ua chế lo cho nên họ lỡ mu tây nó giờ mỗi lỡ cơ đó họ thế này giờ so bây giờ khi đó sẽ được bảo hay tiệt nhưng mỗi giờ chạy lên đó chỉ tôi giờ chạy kia này giờ 但是嘛lỡ chuyện rồi xã chỉ xong đó rất chạy nữa lo này giờ so bây chuyện giống nông gì thì sẽ lỡ thả lại trả tiền nữa I think that's all that Marka said in this round.
Hello, can y'all hear me? I don't know what just happened.
Yeah, Melody, we hear you.
Okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Melody McCurtis. My pronouns is any and all. Said with love. I'm the deputy director and lead organizer here at Metcalf Park Community Bridges. To everything that all of y'all have named, Monka just really gave an overview of like what's happening on the ground in Madison. Here in Milwaukee, we know that our community really came together around this new ICE detention facility that has been approved. And we're not just stopping there, right? We know that in Milwaukee, the makeup of policing in our city makeup values policing. They value us. They devalue our lives, our humanity. So we know that what an ICE detention facility in our inner city means for our folks, right? All of us could be assumed to be immigrants, right? All of us could be assumed to be anything, right? So we got to make sure that we all are safe. That's why it's important for everyone to know their rights. We have to keep folks safe. Our undocumented folks, our immigrant folks, you are our folks, you are our people. And we do not want our people locked up in cages, being treated however they want to treat our folks, right? So we want to make sure that we stay safe. We want to make sure we know our rights. And we want to make sure that this is an issue that is known to harm our communities, right? I could be going down the street and they could just snatch me up, right? Not knowing my status, right? So this is an issue that is all of our issues. So I really want to hone in on that because I keep seeing people say, oh, that's not our issue. It is your issue, right? This is a critical time for us to really be connected in a new way, in a way that we really care and safeguard one another for what's to come. So that's all I'm gonna ask. So make sure y'all share this live. Y'all talk about everything that everybody went through on this live. Y'all talk to folks who saying things like, "Oh, that's not my issue." Have a conversation with them, pull them in because everybody needs to know their rights And everybody needs to know how this connects to them and people that look like them and people that don't look like them.
Thank you, Melody, for sharing that and for coming and tuning in from Milwaukee too, right? Because I think it's so important that we really see and get a sense of like what's happening all over Wisconsin. I think the other thing that I want to highlight as we're talking about money and funding cut is the funding cut that victim service providers are also experiencing during this time as well, right? So I also work for Black and Brown Women Power Coalition, and we are a statewide coalition that works with victims and survivors and with providers and advocates across the state of Wisconsin doing training and technical assistance. And we know that like this last year, there was a huge funding cut, right, for victim service providers. And so I'm really questioning too, and I want folks to like be really tuned in about the state of funding for victim service providers as it relates to the creation of more jails, right, and putting more money towards ICE detention center and all of that, there's such a huge need to like provide like this essential services to keep families and to keep women and girls safe in our community, that we should really be looking at spending money where we can keep our community safe, right, where we can ensure that women and victim survivors have what they need to live a life free of violence, and we can have healthy communities and healthy and have services that provide essential services for folks who are like really needing to escape like violence in the home, really need to escape folks that are harming them and that kind of thing. And so I think it's very important to like make that connection between all of the funding cuts that we're experiencing and all the things that are like happening here in the world. Is there anything that Manka you want to add, or Vina you want to add around that funding piece?
Yeah, I wanted to say that we should not be confused about what is happening. We need to be really clear amongst our communities, because it's important that we use that clarity to move into action, right? So Donald Trump is our new president. We know from the last time that he was president that he is racist and against our people. Since he was sworn in on January 20th, he's made several executive orders to back up his threats against our people. These mass ICE raids are one part of that. The freeze on refugees and the Afghan refugees that have been stopped from coming into the United States after going through the process, the whole resettlement process. The freeze on federal funds and victim services being halted, which we know that a lot of that money goes to women and children and queer and trans folks who are most marginalized in our communities. The trans bans that trans folks are not serving the military, that people cannot use the gender X on their passport. And in fact, people's passports, trans people right now, passports are being held indefinitely. We have members at FI who their passports have been seized indefinitely. And then the limiting of free speech and the flow of information, right? With what happened with the TikTok ban and the back and forth, and the tech monopoly, and aligning himself and allying himself with that. This is about the complete suppression of our people and the complete suppression of our ability to resist. It's about creating chaos and fear and making sure that our people are so overwhelmed that we freeze up and allow this administration and the Christian nationalists that have been organizing since desegregation to quote unquote take back their country, to allow them to do what they want with us. And I'm not willing to sit around and wait for what they think my place is in this country, because we know from our history books what they think our place is in this country. So we also know that the Supreme Court is not positioned to oppose him. And we know that the houses of our legislature, like our House and our Senate, are not positioned to oppose him. So we have to prepare to show up and fight now and for the next 4 years and beyond, so that this never happens to our people again. About that.
Yes, and I think the one way that we can fight, right, in a way that all of us can, like, as U.S. citizens have the right to, is to go out and vote, right? So we have the spring election coming up throughout Wisconsin, and the early election is now until February 16th. And so you can vote early if you have a primary election in your city, early elections happening. But we also have like the spring primary election that's coming up on the 18th as well. And then we have the April general election as well. And so be thinking about how you can make an impact, right? Beyond just like tuning into issues that impact your community and lifting up the organizations that are doing this work, and like really tune into like know what's happening, how you can also protect yourself, your family. Go vote. That's the one right that you have, that all of us have as citizens, that we can make sure that we can exercise, right? And your vote is going to determine. Yes, we know that Donald Trump is in office, and we know that like a lot of things are moving and shifting. But the things that we can do is to vote, right? Vote local, vote at the state assembly level, vote for people that aligns with your values, and vote for people that is going to make sure that whatever is happening at the federal level, that they can catch that at the state level too, right? That they can protect their rights in that way. And so I encourage all of you that's tuning in today to go and vote, right? But to really be intentional and mindful about also how you're moving in community, and be able to support the work that folks are doing, and uplift the work that are happening as well.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, because I see the chat. So early voting goes up until February 16th, but then election day is February 18th, for clarity. In addition to voting, right? Voting is just a tool, right? It is not the all be all. Right now, in this moment, folks should be building community, whether that's building with the people that live on your block, whether that's finding an organization or a political home that is aligning with your values, whether that's my neighbor needs some coffee, and we've been living by each other for 2 years, and we ain't even never said hi to each other. Get to know folks on your block. Start creating um communities of care, right? Because we are in an impossible time. And outside of all of this, we're gonna have to rely on each other in a new way. It's gonna have to be mutual, it's gonna have to be reciprocal. And it's small acts that you could be doing to be building community with folks, right? Um, and take it a step further. You might be like, I don't want to build with this person because I think, you know, this about them, right? Get to know them before you make that assessment, right? If you kind of like an organization, join that organization and change some things up so that it aligns with what you're trying to do. If you see that you can add value to that organization, join that organization. I'm not saying go out there and start a new thing. See what's out there, and if what's out there is not working for you, start building with the folks that's down to build with you. But that's what we need to be doing in this time.
Thank you so much, Melody. We're going to end our live with sharing contact information for our organization. And so thank you so much, too, for all of the organizations that are here today, including Freedom Inc., Metcalf Park, the Moment Government Association, Gesture Inc., Freedom Action Now. You can find the information in the chat, and you can find more information about the work that they do on the Facebook pages as well. So tune into those organizations. Stay safe. Stay in community with each other, and just watch out and like Melody say, like really provide community care for the folks that's in your community. All right. Thank you so much, y'all.